Coming up next, Tony Gosling on Wednesday's Richie Allen Show. Yeah, it is a mortal sin. There will be a black mark on my soul for all eternity for cutting the king down in his prime. But needs must. Time is pressing. Live radio is live radio. And good copy is good copy. Tony Gosling is good copy. I'm not going to introduce Tony. He's been on this programme too many times. Not the BCFM Politics Show, Bristol. 5 to 7, 5 to 8 even. How dare I wash my mouth out with carbolic soap. Carbolic soap. You're old enough, Tony Gosling, to have used carbolic soap, are you not?
So was that the devil's music you were playing there?
I was playing the devil's music, Tony. You know, I was sharing with our listeners the other day that I bumped into you in Bourton on Water, and it was the first time we'd met, and it struck an emotional chord in some listeners, because some of our listeners have been fairly alive to the agendas we talk about for 15 or 20 years.
Have they been to the model village there?
No, because apparently it's like 25 quid per person to get in.
Oh, I know. Yeah, but it's a very weird thing that they have Bourton on the Water. You can go and visit there, and you can also go to the miniature version of Bourton on the Water, in Bourton on the Water, and wander around the streets like I don't know if you remember the Goodies
I do.
Christmas show where they had the gigantic cat, and it's a bit like that in Bourton. It's a bit weird. The kids love it, of course. It's extremely touristy. It was absolutely full of people. But I think it's terrible you playing the devil's music. I did exactly the same last Friday. I played a song called In the Name of the One, which is the Antichrist song, which is a bit of a weird one, but it's from the John Peel show 1995. I first heard that. And it's one of those kind of Mickey take. It's almost as if the Antichrist had a sort of cathedral full of people, this is the sort of thing that they would get down to, I guess. So I think it's important to have a little bit of spiritual balance from time to time. So I play hymns and things like that sometimes, but that was completely the opposite.
Do you believe in the Antichrist?
Well, look, I mean, yes, I think, yeah, I do. I think there's going to be a figure in the future, maybe with us now, maybe not, but certainly in the future, who will oppose God and oppose humanity and try and impose on the world their peace. I mean, this is if you read the book of Revelation, that's what it talks about pretty clearly. Is the idea is chaos will be created, and then this person will arrive on the political scene of the world as the great peacemaker, and there will be 3.5 years or so of peace. I mean, I don't know about the exact timing, but the idea is that this is their war that they've created, but they have the audacity to come along and say, right now we're going to have some peace. So I think this is totally credible for the future. It's a very audacious plan, but I think it fits in very well with Naomi Klein and the shock doctrine and this idea that you can create chaos and you can then control the outcome. And this has been, I think they've been working on this sort of stuff through COVID, etc., for decades now.
Can we, with your permission now, and I've never asked you for a favour, can we stay with this until the top of the hour? Because I've had enough of the hard news, and I think this is really important, because a good friend of mine who comes on this programme from time to time, he's kind of with you on this. There's a spiritual element to what is happening to us, maybe a kind of a, not so much a non-human, but a kind of a non-earthly kind of aspect to all of this. I'm fascinated by you. You're interested in it. You're interested in the book of Revelation. Could this figure, you reckon the figure could be here or might not be here? Don't worry, I'm not going to say stupid things like Elon Musk or Donald Trump or any of that nonsense. But could that figure emerge out of the technical revolution? This non-human, maybe Antichrist figure out of this technical revolution that we are right in the middle of?
Well, yes, is the answer. I think, I don't think that they're necessarily going to be some sort of techie person, because the idea is that the Antichrist figure, I mean, just to give you a bit of context, I mean, this is all kind of like Nostradamus or whatever, Revelation. You go through there. In fact, there were several attempts to get rid of it from the Bible. This is going, if you go back to the synods, the great councils that were held around about, I suppose, the 3rd, 4th, 5th century, about what was going to be in the Bible. And there were some really serious attempts to get rid of Revelation, say, oh, this is just nonsense and rubbish. And in fact, if you talk to a lot of church people, they'll say something similar. But I mean, this is years ago, probably 20 years ago, and my missus and I went on a holiday to the Greek islands, and we had a day trip to Patmos, which is where Revelation is supposed to have been written by John, the disciple John, one of the writers of the Gospels, when he was a very old man, and he had a little guy called Procurus who scribbled it all down, and they know all about it on this island of Patmos. And it just struck me that the local Greeks who lived around there, they were extremely switched on. Most of them did believe in the Bible, and they felt, in a quiet way, that this was a very, very important island that they lived on. And there was a tremendous amount of awareness about the deviousness going on in the world in this place. For example, just coming off the main street, walking up to the little church that's been constructed on the hill where John is supposed to have had his revelation. First thing you see as you walked out of town was a big piece of graffiti, NATO equals Nazi, which is my sentiment, that the NATO has formed from the Nazis at the end of the Second World War. So, that sort of affected my interest in it. And then I started really digging down into Revelation, doing my own kind of timeline about what is in there and what does it mean. Because the thing is, we've got so many interesting things talked about in the book. For example, the mark of the beast. I mean, this is now with us. This is a little microchip that's in your card. It's now in some people's hands and bodies, so that they can just swipe it when they want to go on a ski lift and this sort of thing, and then they don't have to get anything out of their wallet to do it. And that no one will be allowed to buy or sell without this mark. So this is the sort of thing which is now technologically actually with us. The other biggie, and you talking about techie too, is this idea, the image of the beast. Now, the image of the beast in Revelation looks to me very much like a sort of AI animated robot of some sort, which is very closely simulates humanity. Now, all this AI stuff, all it is simulation. It's nothing. It's got no real intelligence. It's all programmed. And actually, there is no such thing as artificial intelligence. It's not intelligent. It's not creative. All it's doing is copying what it's seeing humans doing, and it's got no real sentience to it. It can't think for itself.
Yeah, but hang on. Some very, very clever men and women, not necessarily controlled, they have explained how it might be possible for programs to become sentient and for a program to realize that it exists, and maybe I should act and behave however I feel like it. This is the singularity. Now, I'm open-minded. You might be right, this might be impossible, but some very bright people think it might be possible. We might have a James Cameron Terminator scenario in the future.
Well, that isn't quite what the singularity means, because the singularity is when this technology gets so powerful that it becomes more powerful than we are. Now, it's quite feasible that programmed computers that don't have their own mind can take over from human beings. In fact, they already are. But the idea is that there may be a point which we reach where these computers can stop us actually interfering, say pulling the plug out kind of thing. Now, that isn't the same thing as them having their own sentient, like you and I have.
Yeah, but hang on, it is. It obviously is, because if a computer decides, well, I'm going to take measures to prevent myself from being powered down, well, that's sentience in action, isn't it?
No.
Why not?
What it is, it's just programmed to do that. It's programmed by a human to detect where there might be something coming towards it that's going to turn it off and do something about it. That's not the same as thinking for itself and having its own consciousness at all. I mean, it's just, you can simulate this very well, and you can make it look as if it's, you can make a robot that looks as if it's a human. You can make an AI voice that talks as if it's a human. But I spoke to you about this last time, I think, that, I've fed in all sorts of bits and pieces into these AI things, particularly, I think, is it called Notebook LM, which is the Google one, which is supposed to be one of the best. And I know, as a writer, as a journalist, looking at these books, their significance and the most interesting passages in the books, the points that they're making from somebody that's died maybe 50 years ago or something. And I feed that into the AI, and never has it come out with anything other than a very superficial understanding of that book in isolation, really. It doesn't look at it in context, and it certainly doesn't look into the specific mind-blowing revelations that people have put into their books. So it's always, I think, Richie, always going to be some kind of simulation of a superior intelligence. That's what they're trying to do.
Fair enough, and you might very well be right. Tony Gosling is our guest. Let's go back to the Bible and to the mark of the beast. I was a young kid when Richard Donner made The Omen, and like every young kid, we were thrilled and terrified by it, and we all ran. Remember, we all ran, Tony, to get the Bible. I don't know what sort of house. Well, I know you grew up in a nice household, but in our household in Castlelake, Ireland, each house had a gigantic Bible that was usually given to mum and dad on their wedding day. Just a colossal thing now, right? You couldn't hold it as a child. We all went reading Revelation as best as we could. So Mark of the Beast. So it is revealed that those who do not have the Mark of the Beast, they eventually ascend into heaven to be at the right hand side of the Lord, or to live in paradise with the Lord. Now, there are people who are accepting all sorts of technology today, I believe, because they haven't been fortunate enough to hear your radio show or other radio shows or other podcasts. They're not really committing a sin, are they, by opening their bodies up to microchips and, oh yes, I'll have your Neuralink chip on my brain, Mr. Musk. They're just idiots. They're not sinful, are they?
Well, look, I think we all have charge of our own bodies, our own families, and, you know, the things around us. And if people are gullible enough to relinquish that control, so for example, actually, in a way, this all goes back to the money changers in the temple, because at that point, this is the only time that Jesus used force in his ministry, was going up to these tables and turning them over in the temple in Jerusalem. And what they were doing in there was taking money from people that were coming in, and they had to pay a tax to come into the temple. Look, if you try and go into a cathedral today, go into Salisbury Cathedral, you'll find someone waiting to take your money. If you go up to them and say, I've just come here to pray, they just wave you through. The idea is that they do need a bit of money to look after the place. They want to take it from the tourists, obviously, but they're not going to stop someone coming in. And this is directly going back to that incident in the Bible. So these people who insist on a toll for everywhere you go, whether it's in a city driving a car, whether it's in a place of worship, you've got to pay to come in here. I mean, I personally think in places like English Heritage National Trust, they should all be free and people should pay a donation, but because they shouldn't be prevented. And same in museums, But there has historically been a battle going on, a spiritual war between those that see the be all and end all as money, and that this is the most important system of value. So if people won't pay money for it, it doesn't have value. And the other side, which is kindness, generosity, and it's better to give than it is to receive sort of attitude. So this is a kind of line which divides humanity, really. And I think, in many of our decisions in our life, we're being forced more and more to try and acquire money by whatever means, because we need it for water, gas, all these basic things which are now far more expensive than they really should be because of privatization. So this is what I'm saying, is that society has been slowly maneuvering us into a position where our values in a moral sense are relinquished, dropped. And now everything is taken over by financial value. So where we live, the job we take, even the person we marry starts to be predicated on, which is going to bring me the most money in? Has this person got a lot of property or not? This sort of thing. And, so that I think is why it's so important to understand why this idea of the mark of the beast is at the heart of everything. Money is not your God. This is why it really isn't. And it should be there to serve humanity, not to enslave us.
Yeah, and I'm not being at all sarcastic when I say tell that to the chap and his missus who can't get a mortgage. They're paying £1,000 or £1,100 a month's rent in Salford these days, a place that used to be traditionally way down the scale when it comes to rent prices. and they're working every hour God sends, and they're crippled with anxiety because of it. It's not easy, and I know you're not doing that, to tell those people don't make money the be-all and the end-all of your day-to-day, because they don't have a choice. It's as simple as that. They don't do that, they starve.
Well, where I live here in central Bristol, I'm in a housing association place. But one of the flats here was a shared ownership that they bought probably 10 years ago, maybe even before that. It's just gone on the market for £350,000 for a one-bed flat. They're tiny little places.
Christ.
And, this is what seems to have happened is because we're not making it much anymore in this country, the financialized economy, everything now, all of the economic growth is coming from inflation of property prices. Well, particularly because this is another thing about the mass migration, whether it's legal migration through visas from students, from care workers, or illegal migration across the channel. The point seems to be we've got to have loads and loads and loads of this migration in order to keep the property price going up all the time, keep the demand going. And I'm not saying that in any way as a racist person, because sometimes people try and smear you as a racist for saying it. But this is organised crime behind the channel crossings, and it's big business behind the other forms of mass migration. It's an economic trick, and it's also totally undermined all of the efforts of many, many decades, probably 150 years actually, of what the trade unions have been doing to try and maintain paying conditions, decent working conditions. All that's being undermined by this mass migration too.
There's a guy, forgive me if you've had him on. I do, as you well know, I do listen to you religiously. There's a term, but I do. Tony is on every Friday at 5 to 8 in Bristol. It's really an outstandingly well put together radio show by real broadcasters and real journalists. And thank God for it. But I don't know if you've interviewed Nick Delahanty, who's based in Wicklow, who's based in Dublin. Sure, you and Nick could get on like a house on fire. Well, he's an Irish businessman, and he's been a solicitor as well, I think. And he's done an amazing job, Tony, of exposing the migration industrial complex in Ireland, as he calls it. How prospectors in Ireland have bought up properties all over the country and then said to local authorities, give me a guaranteed income for my property, and you can put international protection applicants in there, basically asylum seekers. It's a gold rush in Ireland. And of course, many of these buildings are important buildings because they might be small hotels, they might be halls where people gathered for their 25th wedding anniversary, and what have you. But he's done an amazing job, Nick. And you've got to imagine, and I'm going to sound very naive here, this is obviously going on here too, right? Must be.
Well, the Irish, I'm sure, know more than anyone else about this mass migration. I mean, we had the deliberate imposition of famines by the Victorian English lords and, the politicians and the economics. And a lot of it was absentee landlords, of course, in Ireland in Victorian times. And that was all about pushing the people out to get on ships to go to America. And so this is an appalling way to be. It needs to be called out for what it is. It's a form of economic slavery, geopolitics, deliberate starvation. It's the same, I think, in the crossings on the Mediterranean, where people are being deliberately impoverished in Africa and then given a sort of a bribe, if you want, saying, well, look, so long as you repay a loan, we will take you across the Mediterranean. So long as you repay the loan, we'll take you across the English Channel. And so it's a system of organised crime, which is absolutely, I think, completely and utterly in lockstep with the policy of Brussels, the European Union, because that's what they are organised crime too. There's no way to vote von der Leyen and her friends out. The European Commission is completely unelected. It's a kind of Masonic mafiosi that's sitting there. They have to come up with excuses sometimes for supporting genocide or the war in Ukraine. But at the end of the day, there's nothing you can do to get rid of these people, and nobody's elected the Commission, which is the government, and the President, who is von der Leyen. Nobody's elected these people, apart from a few MEPs are cajoled into doing it. So this is a systematic, I think, fascistic way running Europe nowadays. And it's not surprising to me that the United States has decided that we're going to pull away a bit from the Europeans. We're not really going to sort of be in bed with them anymore. We see them more as the kind of enemy.
You know what's amazing to me is how many people in Spain, in France, in Portugal, and even in Ireland don't understand the framework of the European Union. So they wouldn't understand that they have no say over who the commissioners are. And they don't even know that MEPs are not allowed to propose legislation. They don't know this stuff. And this is what upset me back in 2016 when we were talking. You and I spoke about the Brexit referendum on this programme. You and I went to great lengths to explain to listeners and to other people that we're not all in with Nigel Farage or any of these people. But the reason why no country should be in the European Union is because no country inside it has any sovereignty worth talking about whatsoever. And they still don't understand this. Irish people, I consider my people, we all consider our people. I consider my people to be a very smart, a very astute, very musical, very lyrical people who are not stupid, but yet they have no idea that there is zero sovereignty in Dáil, Éire and Tony. They have none. They just don't understand it.
Well, the reason is the mainstream press is all a part of the. I mean, it's a taboo. You know, we don't talk about any of this in the mainstream press. Because they're part of the conspiracy. A lot of them are people who go in and out of jobs in politics. I mean, if you look at the people who are running the commission, most of them are failed politicians. People are, think about Mandelson, his journey. He was kicked out twice out of Parliament, and they landed a job as a European commissioner. Now he's ambassador to the US. And I want to say a little bit about somebody I think is an extremely powerful, very, very dangerous guy, Mark Carney. Someone, John Bosnich, was asking me about him the other day. He's a Serbian-Canadian who's been looking into Carney, particularly wanted to know from me, what do you know about this guy? Well, Mark Carney's he's the former boss of the Bank of Canada. When he was the boss of the Bank of Canada, he was one of the main representatives over in Switzerland at the Bank for International Settlements, which is the central banker's central bank. Now, this is the bank that the Bretton Woods Conference after World War II voted to shut down, but then continued opposite Basel railway station for about 30, 40 years after the war, anonymously above a chocolate shop opposite the railway station in Basel. And then eventually they built this gigantic bank in Basel, which is a completely different jurisdiction. So the Swiss police are not allowed anywhere near it. So it is where all the banking regulation is done. And that's where Carney spent many years. Things like it's called, I think, the Systematic Risk Board, the Global Economic Meeting. He was one of the top people. He was chairing of that. Economic Consultative Committee, ECC. All these little organisations, part of the BIS, the Financial Stability Board as well. That's just four for you. He was running these various organisations, which deregulated banking to such an extent that we got the 2008 bailouts and the financial crisis. So all of that money was sucked out of the public sector into the private banks in 2008. As Gordon Brown said, I've saved the world. So this guy is now he's now Prime Minister of Canada. How the hell did he become Prime Minister of Canada? Nobody's voted for him to do that. It's the Liberal Party over in Canada realised Trudeau's rubbish, and so he's not going to win any elections. So they needed to refresh it. So after a little visit to King Charles, after he'd been made the leader of the Liberal Party, suddenly Carney is calling a general election over there. Now, it seems to me Charlie's in charge of this sort of thing. He's saying, come over, have a chat with me, go back to Canada, calls an election. So King Charles is really part of, I think, a massive aristocratic network that's been going for many years, mainly here in Europe, but it's being used in order to bring political influence. And also, of course, he was very much involved in the murder of his wife. So this guy, I think, needs to have the finger pointed at him a little bit more. Allegedly. No, he did. Of course he did. Listen, there's no way that Diana could have been bumped off without Charlie.
Yeah, but not him.
Say so to him.
I mean, he was a nobody. You could maybe convince me.
Prince Charles?
Well, hang on, let me finish. You could convince me that his very sinister Nazi-loving father might have had something to do with it. I could be well talked
Well, it
into
was
that.
his uncle, really. I think it was his uncle. I mean, I'm not so. I rather. I know it sounds a terrible thing to say, but Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, I sort of liked him because he at least had a sense of humour, a genuine sense of humour. Okay, so it was a bit of a dark one. He's also dead
So
now.
did Jeffrey Dahmer. Yeah, he had a sense of humour as well.
It was Edward VIII. Was Charlie's. I suppose what would he be? Not uncle. No. Great granddad, his grandfather, great uncle, I suppose that would be, wouldn't it? He really was serious Nazi, and obviously Mountbatten as well, who mentored Prince Charles when he was a young man, was a very dangerous character. So I think what we're looking at now is a medieval style Europe where there isn't any real point to elections because most of Europe is controlled through Brussels, and there is a whole network of super rich financial and aristocratic elite who inherit many of the desires of the Nazis to control the entire continent through money and not to let anybody have much of a say and have a kind of PR show for it. And I think that I describe as a Fourth Reich. And this is what I did my book about, is looking at the Second World War settlement after the Second World War, the way that the Bilderbergers and others just simply decided to put their people in power in various countries until they got what they wanted, which is this really a United States of Europe and no proper democratic checks and balances whatsoever.
None. Is it true that the Nazis had people working on trying to summon demons, or I hate to use the term demons, but to summon beings from other dimensions? Did they put time and money into that, the Nazis?
Look, I mean, they were extremely superstitious, right? That's for sure. And also, they relied, it's a very good Dennis Wheatley book, which his name escapes me at the moment.
Yeah, he's very good, Dennis Wheatley. Yeah.
Oh, a brilliant writer. Great popular fiction. I mean, I don't know. There were thousands of books around in the 70s. They all seem to have vanished now, but no, they're out there somewhere. But he had a book all about the reliance that the Nazis had on horoscopes and these kind of not mediums, but you know what I mean, people who are reading the horoscopes. And so I think it's called The Haunting of Toby Jug. I'm not 100% sure.
It is. What a brain on Gosling. It is The Haunting of Toby. I've been furiously typing off mic. Bang on. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, he's The Devil Rides Out. Yeah, Gateway to Hell. Go ahead.
Well, The Devil Rides Out is really, really superb. But anyway, this particular book looks at, and Wheatley was involved. He was in Whitehall right the way through the Second World War. Certainly the second 2/3 of it, where this was the most important part. And advising Winston Churchill and various others in the war cabinet to do with psychological warfare. He was called a deception planner, and he's written about quite a lot about that as well. But what he was saying was they had a line into some psychic who was trusted by Himmler and the SS Circle and Hitler, and they were feeding him all sorts of information which they believed. So, for example, things like that the D-Day invasion was going to come through Calais on a certain date. Things were going to happen. And so they would feed various bits of pieces. And this was what was called also the double cross system. So you have agents that are feeding information to them that proves to be actually quite decisive and accurate. But then when it comes to something crucial, you feed them complete nonsense. And that's what they did on D-Day, to such an extent that the Germans kept a whole load of divisions in Calais, completely convinced that that's where the invasion was coming. So I wouldn't say this is, demonic or whatever. And I do think actually that the Nazis were, seriously over on the dark side. Of course they were. But yeah, I mean, that's the way they did it. They did it by pretending to be, mediums and spiritualists and this sort of thing. They managed to con them, basically, because the Nazis were so superstitious.
I've not been... it's not that I've been watching George Lucas and Steven Spielberg films, but again, over the years, I've heard from researchers and stuff that they really believed in the existence of the Holy Grail, the Nazis, and they attempted to find it in somewhere in the Middle East. Again, I haven't just woken up having watched Raiders of the Lost Ark, but if they did that, it'd be fascinating to me that any, seemingly bright group of people, as evil as the fuckers were, excuse my language, but they weren't stupid, that they might go looking for the Grail. Would you go looking for the Grail, T? I'm not being stupid now.
No. Okay, so the Holy Grail is a whole other thing. I was a journalist friend of mine in Bristol who's writing something on it at the moment. So the Holy Grail is sangreal, really, which is the holy blood. So the idea of the Holy Grail was that, I think it's actually a kind of just a cover story, that the Grail, which was circulated in the public and in the Arthurian legends, was really about the holy blood. So there was this myth that Jesus had kids, or at least a child, and that there was a bloodline of Jesus out there, that the Freemasons were protecting this bloodline. So they were keeping it secret, but making sure the people that were part of this bloodline today were protected, and the whole secret was. So there's the book, The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, is a lot about that. So I think that's really what the Holy Grail doesn't really mean anything much. It's just some sort of bucket, that was used in the Last Supper supposedly, but this again is. It's superstitious. It's all to do with a lot of the medieval church was obsessed with these relics of various sorts. But that it's easy to con somebody. It's like an antiques dealer, conning you into thinking that you've got something that isn't really what it is. So there's a lot of money to be made out of this, and the Catholic Church was very big on that. They had all these. They had the Arthurian and Guinevere tombs, I think, in the old Glastonbury Abbey, and this was a great way of bringing in. People on pilgrimages and stuff to go to Glastonbury to see the tomb. But was he really in there? Did he even exist? This is a way to generate income.
It's hilarious you invoking the Catholics' wonderful business acumen. It makes me laugh. If you got
indulgences.
Wait for it. If you got everybody who had ever bought a genuine piece of the cross to bring their pieces together, you could build Westminster Abbey. A scale model.
Boy, are they missing the point, eh? Are they missing the point, eh? Aren't they? They are totally missing the point. The point is, this is a spiritual thing. It's not to do with a little bit of wood that you're going to put. Yeah. We have here in Bristol the whole Cabot thing. If you remember when they chucked Edward Colston into the harbour.
Yes.
There's a whole load of weird stuff going on here with the merchant venturers anyway, who were the people that financed the trip of Cabot to do the genocide in North America from Bristol. And they had stuff like in a cabinet with his bits of his hair and his fingernails from Edward Colston. It was a sort of cult around the guy. And that was up at the Merchant Venturers Hall, apparently. So some people have been in there and seen it.
Hey, Tony, I read a story in the Telegraph today about a man who was hung for murder in the mid-19th century, so about 1860 or otherwise. And the murder was so notorious that they made a book about it, and they used some of his skin to bind the pages. This is true. Back in the honest to God. I'm thinking, why would anybody want to do that? But there was some batshit crazy stuff going on. And it's not that long ago either when you think of it. I'm looking at the clock because I have a lot of messages to read. We've got about 3 minutes to go.
Well, let me say something, please, about the Nazis and the nukes, because last time I spoke to you, I said I would say something.
I know, we should do a whole show on it, really, shouldn't we?
Well, I wouldn't, but the guy's called Todd Ryder. He's based at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I don't think he's a professor in there anymore. He's done his own thing called the Todd Ryder Institute. But he is an absolutely riveting figure. He's one of those people you won't find on DuckDuckGo, Bing, or Google. You have to really drill in to find these people like that. He's so good. But what he's done is this amazing presentation over several months, for Hidden Histories, which explains very, very clearly that there was an enormous cover-up at the end of the Second World War, the extent to which the Nazis had tested twice and developed nuclear weapons. And there's a very, really simple way of understanding that if you look at the Heroes of Telemark film, which I think was in the 1970s, maybe mid-1960s, about the raid on the Norsk Hydro plant where they were making heavy water deuterium. Listen, deuterium is used in hydrogen bombs. It's used in thermonuclear weapons, which were only first tested in the 1950s. The Nazis were way ahead on all this. And even all the scientists, pretty much all the scientists, were either Eastern European or German. And the atom was first split in Berlin. They had plans, as Todd has dug out here. In fact, he's done an amazing job over something like 5 or 6 years, going all around the world into archives, getting slides, photocopies, etc., of showing the extent to which the Nazis had not only developed the actual nuclear weapons themselves, including the plutonium bomb, but also the delivery systems. So that is cruise missiles like the V1. The V1 was designed to be deliver nuclear weapons.
So what went wrong, Tony? In literally in 60 seconds, what prevented them from deploying these weapons and securing victory?
Well, they developed it all by summer, autumn 1944, by which time they'd lost the war. So the more sensible amongst them, I've no idea whether Hitler had a part in all this decision, decided we will use this as a bargaining chip. And we will use this to bargain for our freedom at the end of the war. We know we're going to lose. You know, everyone who's realistic, including people like Rommel, knew they were going to lose. So they did it massively. A lot of planning went into this, and the technology was put into submarines, and at the end of the war, Dönitz had taken over after Hitler's death, Admiral Dönitz, and those submarines, that's why, because all of the technology was in those submarines. He was the admiral, and all that were going to be sent to Japan, but actually, at the end of the war, the orders came through to shoot the Japanese who were on these submarines, and all those submarines then went to the United States. And Todd says he reckons that there were he's seen documents saying there were at least 10 submarines full of technology that was going to America. This, of course, was all very, very top secret, because it would have been extremely embarrassing to admit to the world that this was Nazi weapons that were used against Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But it's taken a long time for this to come out, because basically people have only really talked about it after their death. And also there's a massive amount of a cover-up. He finds so much stuff has been covered up in the American archives. That's why he's gone all the way around the world to put all this presentation together. I think the guy's a superhero. He should be like one of the world's top journalists, and this should be shouted from the rooftops. Nuclear weapons were developed and tested way before the Americans had them by the Nazis.
If it's true, it's stunning stuff. I know you
Have
think
a look
it
at
is.
it.
Yeah.
Watch the presentations. That's the thing to do. If you don't believe me, never believe what I say.
It's not about...
Just watch the presentation.
Yeah, it isn't about not believing it. Send me a link so that I can put it on the podcast notes, because they'll all be screaming at me.
I'll do it right now.
Brilliant chat, pal. Thanks as always. Love having you on. Can't wait for next time. Thank you, Tony.
God bless.
This
God
week,
bless, and have a happy Easter. Have a
happy
great
Easter,
Go
of
to
course.
church if you can.
Well, I don't know about that, but thank you.
On Easter Sunday, it's well worth it. You know, put in a prayer for people in Gaza. Why not?
Fair enough, T. I won't argue with that. Tony Gosling, live in the Richie Allen Show, every Friday, 5 to 8 p.m. Not the BCFM Politics Show. Thisweek.org.uk, Bilderberg.org. You'll find Tony Gosling on Twitter too. I wanted to read lots and lots of your messages, because many of them came in. I want to read this from Alex, because Alex is a techie guy. And I know he is. Richie, AI today is mathematics applied to humongous amounts of data, which give the impression of intelligence, because it can do things in seconds that would take you hours or days. So it can do in seconds what would normally take hours or days. From that to sentience, there's a chasm. Nevertheless, it is already now very useful and a time saver for many tasks, but calling it intelligence is misleading, says Alex. It's more like smart computing. Very interesting. Wayne came back to say the Nazis also wanted the spear of destiny, which the Allies were also after. This, or what's meant to be the spear, does really exist, and the Nazis got hold of it and the Allies tried to get it back, says Wayne. Thank you, Wayne. Good evening, Seamus. Tony has really good grounding in past events leading to where we are with the agendas. And Mark Windows also has this, plus a great sense of where and how things will progress. Thank you very much. Seamus, no doubt Mark will be on the programme again soon, in the very near future. That's pretty much it for the programme today. Thank you to Stuart Waiton, the criminologist, the journalist, the lecturer. Go to scottishunionforeducation.substack.com for more on Stuart. We talked about the UK Supreme Court ruling that woman equates to biological female, which, unsurprisingly, has proven to be controversial with trans people, or some trans people. Maybe the loud minority, maybe. I think there's a silent majority of men who choose to live as women, but do not want to impose their choice, their lifestyle on other people. I still believe this. It is my absolutely genuinely held belief that this is the case. Anyway, it doesn't matter what I believe anymore, because that is it for today. I'm back with you tomorrow, Thursday. Might fly solo. Might spend the day gathering some amusing things for you and I to talk about. We could do with a laugh, right? Right, okay. That's my pledge to you. I'll bring a few laughs to the programme. Tomorrow we'll have a few giggles. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday, Arsenal fans. Looking forward to this evening's second leg quarter-final European Champions League away at the Bernabeu, the Santiago Bernabeu Stadium in Madrid. Arsenal with a 3-0 lead, but it might be a roller coaster. I'm pulling for Arsenal, of course. We want Arsenal to win, don't we? I do, in any case. So come on the Gunners, oop the Gooners. Closing out with Foreigner. Until